This is where we left off last time. We did all the anatomy and physiology, and we went over RLN monitoring, specifically for thyroidectomies and parathyroids. Now, we also did our facial nerve anatomy and our facial muscle anatomy, so we should be all caught up and good there. I want to spend the last few minutes, it's about 8 slides, that we're going to go through facial nerve monitoring. A lot of what I'm going to say we actually already covered because it's a cranial nerve, and everything we've talked about last lesson is applicable to all cranial nerve monitoring, okay? All right. So we know a little bit about the facial nerve and where it comes from and where it goes to and what it does. But basically it emerges from the brainstem and it branches into 5 unique branches, right? And this branching occurs once it enters the parotid gland. And I mentioned to you that the parasympathetic component actually innervates all of the salivary glands except the parotid gland. And I thought that was a little paradoxical. It's kind of a cool fact. And we often say that parotid surgery is facial nerve surgery because indeed that's what it is. You can't take out the parotid without intimately interacting with the facial nerve, right? And when they do parotidectomies, they'll sometimes talk about superficial or a deep parotidectomy. A superficial parotidectomy is where they take out the gland that is superior to where the plane that the nerve lies in. And then a deep parotidectomy is a total, where they take out both the superficial and deep portion relative to the plane of the nerve. Okay? And they do this usually because of parotid tumors, which are fairly common. We monitor all branches except usually the cervical. We don't do that. And just like with the RLN, we'll stimulate the facial nerve to identify it and try to stay out of its way. There's a unique little trick that works for facial nerve, and it works too with the RLN, is that stimulation at closing with thresholds that are less than 0.5 milliamp is prognostic of no long-term deficit. So if you could show that you could stimulate the nerve and you are at a threshold of less than 0.5, even if that patient wakes up with some hemiparesis, some weakness on that side, you'd be relatively confident that it's going to go away. Okay? This is a pretty reliable indicator. Now, this is an interesting figure that I pulled from the internet. It's actually showing you something a little different than I'm going to actually talk about. But when you're reading your EMG, your facial EMG, you'll often notice that your orbicularis oculi can be a little noisy. Has anyone noticed that? Yes? Anybody have a positive experience on that? Well, it can be. It can be a little noisy, your oculi. And sometimes you struggle to figure out, is that the patient that's kind of light? Is it eye movement? Is it, what's going on here? Why is oculi the only noisy channel? Well, it turns out if you've ever looked up, if they have a BIS monitor running and they've got the little raw waveform trace, and you ever look up at it, you'll notice that the noise in your EMG on that channel matches the trace that you're seeing on the BIS, which you're actually recording. Think about where your electrodes are. You're recording frontal EEG, right? Frontal EEG. And when we talk about EEG in one of our next sessions, and we talk specifically about EEG patterns under anesthesia, you'll know that a lot of these faster rhythms occur frontally during anesthesia, all right? So here's an example of what we're talking about. So if you have your leads placed here in oculi or frontalis, you're right over the frontal bone, and here's the frontal lobe of the brain, right? And you're going to pick up EEG from this area. Now, they're showing this hot spot right here. Actually, what they're showing, this slide is meant for EEGers that are picking up myogenic activity. So they have the opposite problem. They're trying to record EEG, and they keep picking up muscle tone from the eyes, right? And so this hot zone here is actually myogenic activity. But I think that it was a nice figure, so I showed it. It really serves a purpose. What you're seeing is this fast frontal EEG in those channels. So be aware of that if you ever don't know what it is. Questions so far? All right. What are our parameters? Well, they're similar to the RLN. We're at about 50 to 100 microseconds in duration. We're about 0.1 all the way up to 2 milliamps in intensity. And we stimulate it to 0.x hertz. Now, everybody knows, but it bears repeating in case you forget. 2.x just meaning that you want to avoid a harmonic of 60, okay? You don't want it to be an even divisor of 60. 2.2, 2.5, anything like that wouldn't work. So, you have to pick something, 2.37 or whatever. I also want you to remember that the latency of the response of the facial nerve, if you were to stimulate the brainstem, is about 7 milliseconds. Now, from the parotid, it's going to be shorter. So again, we're paying a lot of attention to our time base, right? Making sure our response isn't all scrunched up over on the side by our stem artifact. Here's an example of people who just set up oculi and oris, it looks like. Look at this. This is a nice figure just to show you. This was done at the brain stem. And here's cranial nerve 5 stimulated, CMAP. If you hear my kid in the background, I do apologize. I've got 4 of them, and so we're going to get one at some point. And here's cranial nerve 7 coming in at approximately 7 milliseconds. And then, similar to your spinal EMG, we could talk about pathological responses, and it's the same criteria. Bursting or training, training or neurotonic discharges are pathological. Bursting and spiking are often actually informative. So during a parotid especially, the surgeon knows they're going to be near the nerve. It's going to be unavoidable. So having that audio speaker on and then hearing the short bursts that occurs, they go near the nerve, that's useful. That's not pathological. That tells them, hey, I'm near the nerve. I know I am, and I'm going to keep listening to this because this gets a little worse. I know I'm getting a little too close or I'm aggravating it too much. And sometimes, to be honest with you, they can't do anything about it because the tumor, if the pathology isn't favorable, the tumor's got to come out. So at least maybe they can take a break for a second, work on the other side, and try to baby the nerve, if you will. They got to be on top of it, and sometimes they do. At least having that information allows them to take a little longer, baby the nerve, do that sort of thing. Okay. Now, it doesn't matter what the amplitude of your trains are, correct? We all know that low amplitude trains are just as harmful as high amplitude trains. So don't get fooled by amplitude. We talked about this prognostic indicator of less than 0.5. You will run into, especially when you're doing craniotomies, that if you're talking about a posterior fossa case, that number is actually 0.05. So we stimulate it a lot lower when we're at the brainstem. And there are a couple papers out there that show the same type thing, but it's 0.05 milliamps as being prognostic for not having a deficit. Okay? So 0.5 at the parotid, 0.05 at the brainstem. And that is it. What I'd like to do now is go back, answer any questions you have, and then I'm going to launch the test. Anything? Ooh, silence. That's either good or bad. I don't know about that. All right. Well, here it's going to come.